I want to start by talking to you a little bit about myself, just to give you some grounding. As you heard from Colleen, my wife and I are blessed with 8 beautiful children, and the oldest of whom is 16, the youngest of whom is, as you see, a year and a half. And we are so blessed, and we do lots of amazing things together, and have this wonderful life of faith, but it wasn't always so. See, my going around speaking about sexuality has to do also with my past. And my past is one where I wasn't on your side of the issue. I was very much on the other side. I lived a very hedonistic life for quite a few years, and my cross, or my temptation, if you will, wasn't so much the topic that we're speaking about tonight, homosexuality, but it was pornography. I was addicted to pornography. I found myself, even though I was, living this lifestyle, I thought, I said the common line, it doesn't bother me. You've heard that line 100 times. You watch a TV show or a movie or something with slight pornography in it, you might call it. Just a little bit of a sex scene here. Oh, we can fast forward. It doesn't matter. And the common line is, doesn't bother me. I can look at that. It doesn't bother me. That's a lie. We're built so that it does, not necessarily so-called bother us, but it does affect us. All men are built this way, and women, well, they're built a certain way that's somewhat different, but men are principally attracted to the opposite sex or to sexuality through the eyes. So the line, it doesn't bother me, is a lie. It does affect me. And as I lived my life that way, having a girlfriend or two and living a life of a lie and being so addicted to this stuff that I couldn't stop, one day I remember telling myself, it doesn't bother me. I can just stop any old time. So I'll stop for a long time. And the next day I found myself walking to the video store wondering what I was doing. And that's when I realized, oh my gosh, I'm not in control of this. It's in control of me. And my life took a downward spiral, and it was always one step away from getting caught. Getting caught by one girlfriend to another, getting caught by my parents viewing this stuff or seeing this stuff, and my life was miserable. When it came to my conversion and my freedom out of this addiction, it was through various means, but what it really brought me to was a realization of joy, of freedom. All of a sudden, the teaching of Christians, the Christian teaching about Jesus comes to give us freedom, made so much sense. So many people tell us, you're going to be a Christian. You're going to have to be put into a box. You're going to have all these rules. Your life is going to be miserable because you're restricted. I'm free to do what I want any old time. And the fact is, it's a lie. Christ came to give us life and give it to us abundantly. He actually came to give us freedom. Freedom from sin. Because when we don't have that freedom in Christ, we are slaves. And I am telling you, I'm speaking not from a book, not from something I saw and watched on TV, but from something I lived. And so it's for this same freedom and for this same hope that I speak on these issues of sexuality very often all over the place. And probably one of the most difficult issues today is the topic of tonight's talk, homosexuality, same-sex marriage. And it's something that Christians must come to, not with a shunning of people who are same-sex attracted, not with a condemnation of people who are inclined to homosexuality, but with love. Yes, love. The most famous line we hear from the opposition, if you want to call it that, is, how does my love for me and my partner, how does that affect you in your marriage? You're a hater and a bigot because you don't love, you're against love. What is your problem? And those are hard questions to answer because it certainly seems that way. You've heard all the arguments, well, it's bad for children, every child needs a mother and a father. That's very true. Society needs to propagate the society, and we need to have this. Marriage was from the beginning of the world till now. That's all true. But it still sounds like a poor argument in the face of, you're against love. What is your problem? You know, as Christians, we're all taught love is the principal value of everything. It's all about loving God and loving neighbor. It's all about love, period. What did we call it? We even told God is love. So how can we come back to all these arguments, you're against love, with, well, there's society and there's children and it's always been this way. So that sounds poor compared to love. The actual answer of Christians, the actual answer is love. There is something we have to remember about God, and that is He created us. And as I said earlier, He didn't create us to be put into a box to be restricted. He created us to make us free. And the rules He gives us, the rules He gave us, were to make us free. We can understand it more easily if we talk about our own children. You see my 1.5-year-old, well, you don't see him right now. He's running around. He's always running around. And he loves to run around, and he's 1.5, so he loves to get into trouble. And can you imagine my 1.5-year-old loving to be on top of a cliff, kicking over the rocks over the edge and watching them fall way back down? And he'd probably have a grand old time watching them splash into the water and crash against other rocks. It would be fabulous for him. Except it would also be perilous for him, very dangerous for him. So, am I a loving father if I say, oh, having a great time? God, go, kick it hard, yes. No. I'm a loving father if I take him away. But what if when I take him away, he says, no, Daddy, don't take me away. I'm having so much fun. He probably would. Lots of you guys have had children. That's what they do when you take them away from dangerous things. No, I wanted that. I wanted to eat that poisonous thing. Don't take it away from me. But that's what we do if we love. We even put up with that, you hate me or I hate you for doing this to me. We put up with that because we love. And so when we come to sexual teaching, we know God created our bodies and He created them in a certain way. And when we're together, husband and wife, and the two become one flesh, which everybody understands what that means, they fit together. It works. When we realize God created us, male and female, and He did so and gave us this gift of sexuality, why? So we could join Him in creation. The bodies fit together. And all of a sudden, oh yeah, it makes so much sense. It works. Nothing else works, does it? So that's a very simple concept. But what happens when there's everything else? Don't other things work? Can't we get IVF babies? Can't we have other forms of sexuality? Can't we have fun and pleasure? Well, there is pleasure, yes. But it's the same kind of pleasure that babies get on top of cliffs. It's dangerous. And it hurts us. Now, with regard to homosexuality, that's very clear. Go look at the studies. On lifesitenews.com, which is the news service that I founded about 15 years ago now, we have published stories on many, many, many studies showing the great harm to the body these sexual practices cause. And guess what? There's sexual harm from illicit heterosexual sexual behavior as well. Because all the laws of God are to be followed. He created our bodies in a certain way so that all the sexual laws of God, which include for married couples to be faithful to one another and nobody else. So when those laws of God are flouted, we inherit in our bodies also sexually transmitted diseases that come with promiscuity and more. And you can go and look up those studies on LifeSite News. There's also, by the way, psychological harm that comes to us from flouting God's law on sexuality. And those harms are very little understood and very little known. For instance, one of the interesting findings is that when you're first with somebody sexually, you actually get a permanent psychological bond to that person. Oops, that doesn't do well if you just had your first experience and you don't intend to marry that person or outside of marriage. There's a problem with that then. But there are many, many implications. So there's these physical harms and there's psychological harms. But today, very often, we get told when we bring up these things, oh, come on, you're blowing it up. You're exaggerating. Don't give me that study schmuddy. Well, then I love to tell people, then don't believe me. Don't believe the studies. Why don't we talk to the homosexual activists themselves? And I'm going to read you a quote now from a gay activist in Canada. This is the leader of the Rainbow Health Coalition, and he was talking in Canada 4 years after same-sex marriage passed. We passed same-sex marriage legislation in 2005. And here's what Jens Hellquist had to say. He was writing in Canada's largest homosexual newspaper. And he said, and I quote, "We have one of the poorest health statuses in this country. Health issues affecting queer Canadians include lower life expectancy than the average Canadian, suicide, higher rates of substance abuse, depression, inadequate access to care, and HIV/AIDS. He added, there are all kinds of health issues that are endemic to our community. We have higher rates of anal cancer in the gay male community. Lesbians have higher rates of breast cancer. And he went on and on. And then he concluded in these words, now that we can get married, everyone assumes that we don't have any issues anymore. A lot of the deaths that occur in our community are hidden. We don't see them. Those of us who are working on the front lines see them, and I'm tired of watching my community die. If we aren't going to believe the word of the scientists who show us the research, if we're not going to believe the words of Christians who have been in the lifestyle and suffered from it, if we're not going to look into the AIDS hospices and see the great suffering there, then at least believe the homosexual activists themselves when they tell us what their community is experiencing from this behavior, which our bodies were never meant to endure. So what is it when we then approach our brothers and sisters who are same-sex attracted and tell them, don't do that. It hurts you, and I care enough about you to tell you that it hurts you. It is love. It is especially love today, where when you go ahead and say that, no one, well, almost no one, stands there and claps for you. Oh, isn't that great? Wow, let's give that guy a prize for being courageous enough to stand up. No, what are you called? In society today, you're called most of the time, you're a hater and a bigot. You know what else happens? What else happens today in Canada, where we've experienced same-sex marriage since 2005? In the beginning, we were all told, oh, this won't affect anything. It will have, just free love for everybody, and everybody will be fine. Well, let's look at Canada and see what happened. In the very beginning of this, while it was still being pushed even, mayors across the country who objected to proclaiming Gay Pride Day were fined. They were told they had to, and they said, no, I can't, I'm a Christian. And they said, tough luck. And they were sued. Some sued for $75,000 in court costs, and then having to pay $15,000 out to homosexual activists, and then their offices being forced to proclaim Gay Pride Day anyway. Then bed and breakfasts were affected. Bed and breakfasts where people invited people into their homes to sleep over and made them a nice breakfast. And when there were Christian couples across the country who were doing these bed and breakfast things, and two men came to their home and said, we'd like a bedroom for the night, they said, oh, I'm sorry, we're Christian. We don't agree with homosexual activity. You know, there's another bed and breakfast just down the street over there. Their bed and breakfasts were sued and shut down right across Canada. We have many other examples of this kind of thing. When we were told there would be no effect, there was an effect. There's a printer in Toronto, the main city of Canada. His name is Scott Brocky. He runs a printing press, and in Toronto, you have to understand, it's like printing heaven. On certain areas of the city, there's a printer every 4 feet. Okay, so there's these massive printing shops. They're all near the universities because they know everybody has to come and reprint their essay a million times so all their profs can look at it. And so there's these littered everywhere. And yet, into this one Toronto printer's copy house came a homosexual activist, and he would like some material reprinted. And it was material, homosexual activist material. And the printer said, I'm a Christian, and so you've got like 1,000 other choices on the same block, so if you wouldn't mind, if you can go next door, that'd be great. I'm sure they'd love your business. But no, he was sued. He was sued, and he was a Christian man, and he was sued so much that he lost his home. He was an evangelical Christian named Scott Brocky, and you can look him up on LifeSite News and see what happened to him. But he was sued successfully and had to pay out the costs. In Calgary, Alberta, there was a man who put an ad into a newspaper, and the ad had Bible verses. It didn't spell out the Bible verses. No. It just said like Leviticus, whatever number it was, and two other verses. And then it had an equal sign with a scratch through the equal sign. And then it had 2 stick figures of 2 men holding hands. Meaning, these Bible verses say that it is not right to have same-sex activity or homosexual marriage or whatever the sign said. But that was it. It was a little box sign about yay big. He paid for it to be in the newspaper. It's an ad. It's an ad quoting, not even quoting, just listing Bible verses saying all it means is there should be no homosexual activity. And he was sued. And he was sued successfully. Not only him, but the paper was sued too. And the paper had to pay out and promise never to put that kind of an ad in again. And he was sued and had to pay out as well. After fighting all the way through the court system to the right to the Supreme Court, was finally overturned because it basically would say that we're making illegal the Bible. And they weren't quite ready for that yet. Also, this affects not only, by the way, secular things, it also affects religious things. Well, there was a Knights of Columbus Hall. You know what the Knights of Columbus here? They're very similar to your Knights of the Southern Cross. And they own buildings. And this Knights of Columbus had a hall that they owned where they had their meetings, and they rent their hall out for certain functions as well, church functions and bazaars, etc. Well, this one lesbian couple came up to them and said, "Hi, we'd like to have our wedding ceremony and party here." And they said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we're a Roman Catholic institution, and therefore we can't have that here." And they were sued. And they were sued successfully. They had to pay out $15,000, I believe it was. But this doesn't only happen to people on the street. This doesn't only happen. It happened, by the way, to another incident was a teacher. The teacher taught in the classroom. It was in a public school. And did he teach against same-sex marriage in the classroom? No, he didn't. He knew that was forbidden in the public classroom. But he did write a letter to the editor of the public newspaper saying that he agreed in traditional marriage. Oh, and guess what? He was fired from his teaching job. I have a friend named Damien Goddard. He was a sportscaster. He was on Sportsnet. In Toronto, we have a nice basketball team called the Raptors, and he was the sportscaster for Sportsnet. It's a great job. It puts you in the limelight. It puts you on TV. Everybody knows who you are. It's a great job. The man is a Roman Catholic. And in sports, the issue of same-sex marriage hardly ever comes up, but he saw that in the United States, a coach said he was in favor of traditional marriage, and he was getting hounded by the media. So my friend Damien, being a good, upstanding Catholic, tweeted. You know what tweeting is? If anybody follows the internet enough, you should know what tweeting is. He tweeted just a tiny little message that he supports traditional marriage too. And you know, when he talked to me about it, he said it was like Sauron's eye turned to him. And within 10 minutes, including all of these anti-Damien Goddard tweets, was a tweet from his employer, Sportsnet.
The views of Mr. Goddard do not reflect the views of Sportsnet.
And he saw that and he said, ooh, that's kind of weird. And in an hour, he had a phone call. And it was his boss at Sportsnet and said, hey, Damo, are you in tomorrow? And he said, no, it's my day off. Good, come in the very next day, first thing in the morning. And he was fired. These things are affecting us big time. But not only just lay people, not only people who are out there in the streets and in business and in teaching and on TV, it's affecting the church directly. Calgary Bishop Fred Henry wrote in the newspaper, yes, the public newspaper, the Catholic teaching on homosexuality. And he was sued by the Human Rights Commission, and he was going to be forced to pay out. He paid hundreds of thousands of dollars of diocesan money in fighting the case. Eventually it was dropped. Another incident of a bishop, this time a Peterborough bishop, Nicola De Angelis, very nice guy. One of the priests of his diocese was a kind of a, well, he had some problems of his own. He had a homosexual couple serving at Mass. And a lot of the parishioners said, that's not right. Those guys are living together and stuff, and this is wrong at Mass. So they complained to the bishop, about 15 of them or so, and the bishop sent a letter to the priest saying, I'm sorry, we can't have that. That's just wrong. And so one of the altar servers sued the bishop for $25,000 and each of the complainants for $20,000 each as well. Now again here, after hundreds of thousands of dollars spent in trying to fight the case, the bishop actually worked out with the fellow something and the case was dropped. But it's not only just lay people, business people, teachers, sportscasters, and the church. The very next thing that comes after same-sex marriage is education. What do you think your children are going to get taught in school when same-sex marriage passes? They will be taught that it is equal to heterosexual marriage. And not only in public school. In the province of Quebec, which was our most Catholic province at one time before the sexual revolution, there they passed a law called the Ethics and Religious Culture. It's a forcing of a course to be taught religions are all equal, but also families are all equal. Heterosexual couples, families are equal to homosexual couples and families. The weird thing about this law was that it was passed to be in all public schools, but also all publicly funded Catholic schools. But even more than that, even privately funded schools, and more than that, also in homeschooling. Now, a homeschooling family took this case to the court. And it went right to the Supreme Court of Canada, and the courts decided for the government. So we have in our community of Ontario, which is close to Quebec, a Quebec couple and their children who are escaping from this dictatorial system in their province. But they're not safe in Ontario because we just passed legislation in Ontario to force into all Catholic schools anti-gay bullying clubs, which sounds just fine. I mean, no one's for bullying. Catholics are against any type of bullying, whether it be calling someone gay or lesbian or whatever, or beating them up for any other reason. The big reasons, of course, which people get beat up for in school is you're fat, you're ugly, and something others. I think if you look at where you fall when it comes to gay and lesbian bullying specifically, it's way down the list. But that doesn't matter, because as Catholics, we're against all bullying. Bullying is terrible. But there was something wrong with these clubs that they were forcing into Ontario, because it was specifically anti-gay bullying clubs. Because the church said, no problem, we can do that law because we're against all bullying. And the government said, It's an only anti-gay bullying club that we want. And so being a news service, we called the government up and we said, well, the Catholic Church has certain beliefs about homosexuality. Are they going to be allowed to relate their beliefs as part of this club that's about homosexuality? And the answer was no. And the government forced it on the schools. And those are publicly funded Catholic schools. The Catholic ratepayers, the taxpayers who are Catholics, direct their funding to the Catholic system. And those funds are used, public funds, to pay for the Catholic system, very much like you have here in your school system. And the government basically says, do you want us just to keep our money? And so the bishops are in a quandary as to what to do. The law's already passed. It's already in. Implementation is this September. What are we going to do? You know, this happened also in the Yukon. In the Yukon, which is another territory in Canada, the education minister said to the bishop there, they saw a document online on the Catholic School Board's website about homosexuality and how to deal with it. Specifically, how to deal with it when young people present themselves with having same-sex attraction. That they should never be bullied. That they should never be, discriminated against. That they should be treated justly and fairly like everyone else. And they should be offered help and assistance. And then it quoted, of course, the teaching from the Catechism, which is that the homosexual orientation itself is disordered, but it's not a sin. Just because we have an inclination to sin doesn't mean it's a sin. You know the line that we always hear from the homosexual activists? You're born that way? I love that line. You know why? Because with original sin, we're all born that way. We're all born with an inclination to sin. And for most of us, for most of the planet right now, we're all born with an inclination to sexual sin as well. So we might not be tempted to sexual sin of a same-sex nature, but we're tempted to sexual sin as married people toward adultery. Jesus said, not only those who commit adultery, if you look at a woman with lust, you've already committed adultery in your heart. Are we tempted that way? You bet we are. Especially today where it's shoved up your nose everywhere you go. You can't even drive on the highway without seeing a huge poster in front of you. It makes you want to run off the road in order to be able to avoid it. But we're called to avoid it. We're called to avoid all sexual sin. And it's not easy. It's not easy at all. But when our brothers and sisters who are same-sex attracted can show us the way of sexual purity, especially in this culture where they are so picked upon by the culture to go for that tendency, to fulfill that temptation, to act on it, then we can take courage that we can fight our own inclinations to sexual sin as well. It is an act of love to stop same-sex marriage. Why? Because legislation is a teacher. When there's a law passed, it puts a societal stamp of approval on something or disapproval on something. So what same-sex marriage does is it puts a societal stamp of approval upon homosexual acts, a behavior that is deadly for bodies and also for souls. As Christians, we have another thing to think about. It's not only the great harm to your body that homosexual acts, and by the way, other sexual sins cause, and the harm to your psychology, it's also the harm to the soul. Do you realize we're on this earth for such a very short time? When I talk to youth groups, I always make an example of a line that starts here at my shoulder, goes on through the roof, through the sky beyond the stars. And I love to say when I'm here, there's another line. It goes through the floor, and it goes through the world, and out right where I live in Canada, and then it goes through the sky that way. And both those lines actually never end. You have to imagine them being massively going on forever and ever in both directions. And they both start at the same point here on my shoulder, and the point on my shoulder is so thin that if I show it to you, it's as thin as a sheet of paper. You can hardly see it. And that length of time where they start is your whole life. And in that whole life, that tiny point, you're going to do lots of things. You're going to get an education. You're going to likely have a family. You're going to likely have a job. You're going to do all sorts of things. But principally, you're going to decide where you're going to go forever and ever. And when you make that choice in that short period of time, you get to understand, oh my gosh, life is really about one thing principally. Deciding where we're going to go forever and ever. And so it's about helping our brothers and sisters not only to avoid the great harm to their body and to their psychology, but also to their souls. You know, the harm that comes from this activity comes to the persons who do them, but as we've seen from the examples from Canada, also to the society at large. And what is going to come of it is the same sort of thing that comes of it when we talk about pornography. You see, with pornography, you have not only harm to yourself, which you do, which I described earlier, because you become addicted, you basically become miserable, but you create harm for others. I want to read to you a very powerful quote from someone who was inside the porn industry and came out. This is an actress who was what they call, of course, a porn star. And here's what she had to say. She said, "Men, God loves you. I love you too, and I will always pray for all of you, for the chains to be broken. You are a slave to porn as much as any porn star. If you are viewing porn or addicted to porn, you are trying to fill a void inside of you that only God can fill. Whenever you look at porn, you are making the void bigger, and you will destroy your life." She said, porn is evil, it's a drug, and a poison, and a lie. If you think you can keep it in the dark, God will bring it out into the light to stop you and heal you. And then she said these very powerful words addressing men. These women are precious and deserve to be loved just as much as you do. There is a real person on the other side of the images you are seeing, and you are destroying her life and the lives of her children. Every porno has somebody's daughter in it. What if it were your little girl? You may actually be assisting in someone's death. Male and female porn actors die all the time from AIDS, drug overdoses, suicides, etc. Please stop looking at porn. We have to realize that there are massive consequences for sexual sin because God made us and He gave us our bodies and they made them in a certain way so that we could be free. He gives us these rules so that we will not harm ourselves. He gives us these rules. These rules are love. And I guess our big thing today is, do we love enough to tell our brothers and sisters who are same-sex attracted, who are into pornography, who are into promiscuity, who are into adultery, please stop, because it's harming you, and it's harming your brother or your sister. And I love you enough to tell you that, even if someone calls me a hater and a bigot, and maybe even if someone comes to arrest me for it one day. Do we love enough to stop same-sex marriage? And that really is the question. Pope Francis, our newly elected pope in the Catholic Church, is famous for this washing of the feet thing. And once he was at an AIDS hospice and washed the feet and kissed the feet of AIDS victims and saw firsthand the terrible consequences of sexual behavior that leads to the death and destruction of the body. And so it was no surprise to Catholics or Christians who could see that he fought same-sex marriage, but not out of hatred or bigotry, but out of love. Do we love enough to stop same-sex marriage? I'm going to stop there and ask you for questions.